The corridors of the immense city hospital were a labyrinth of polished linoleum and the sharp, antiseptic scent of isopropyl alcohol, a smell that Taesung associated less with healing and more with the aftermath of violence. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit, the fabric straining slightly across the shoulders, and checked his watch for the third time in a minute. He wasn't here for charity. He was here because a territory dispute had gone sideways, and one of his best lieutenants was currently in surgery with a bullet lodged near his spine. Taesung was a man who commanded silence and obedience with a single glance, a figure carved from granite and street-hardened discipline. The nurses gave him a wide berth, sensing the dangerous gravity that pulled the air tight around him. He was a ghost in the machine of the living, waiting for news of the dead. Then the absurdity happened. A blur of golden fur, no bigger than a loaf of bread, scrabbled around the corner, its paws sliding comically on the waxed floor. It was a puppy, a golden retriever with ears too big for its head, and a tail that seemed to be propelling it forward like a rudder. It barked, a high-pitched yip that shattered the oppressive quiet of the oncology wing. Taesung blinked, certain for a moment that the lack of sleep was causing hallucinations. The puppy skidded to a halt, looked directly at the terrifying man in the expensive suit, and then took off again, a streak of chaotic joy in a place of sterilized sorrow. Without thinking, strictly on the instinct to control chaos, Taesung moved. He didn't run. Men like him didn't run unless the building was collapsing. He strode with long, rapid steps, pursuing the creature. "Hey," he grunted, his voice rough with smoke and exhaustion. The puppy ignored him, weaving between a startled orderly and a cart of meal trays. It turned sharp left into room 402. Taesung followed, his hand instinctively going to the inside of his jacket where steel usually rested, though he was unarmed today. He pushed the heavy door open, prepared to grab the animal and apologize to whatever terrified patient lay inside. The room was dim, lit only by the gray afternoon light filtering through the blinds and the rhythmic, glowing pulse of the vitals monitor. The air here was warmer, smelling faintly of vanilla lotion and stale flowers. The puppy was already there, its front paws scrabbling against the side of the hospital bed, whining softly. Taesung froze in the doorway. Lying in the bed was a woman who looked as though she were made of porcelain and shadows. She was African American, her skin distinct against the stark white sheets, but her cheeks were hollowed out by illness, her collarbones sharp ridges beneath a thin hospital gown. She couldn't have been much older than 30, yet there was a timeless weariness etched around her eyes. She stirred, her hand dropping weakly to brush the puppy's head. The dog licked her fingers, a frantic, loving assault. Taesung felt like an intruder in a cathedral. He should have turned around. He should have walked out. But the woman opened her eyes, dark, deep, and clouded with pain, and looked right at him. She didn't scream. She didn't reach for the call button. She just blinked, as if he were a hallucination brought on by the morphine. "He got out again," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves scraping pavement.
"I'm sorry."
He just hates the cage. Taesung stood there, the feared boss of the Gwangja syndicate, completely disarmed by a 3-pound dog and a dying woman. Taesung remained rooted to the spot, his hand still gripping the cold metal of the door handle. The silence that stretched between them wasn't the menacing silence of a negotiation table. It was fragile, like thin ice. The puppy, apparently satisfied that its owner was still there, dropped to the floor and panted, looking proud of its escape artist routine. Taesung cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "Is this yours?" he asked, gesturing vaguely at the golden fluff ball. It was a stupid question. Of course it was hers. The woman tried to shift herself up, wincing as the movement pulled at the 4 lines taped to her arm. Taesung, driven by a reflex he didn't know he possessed, stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Don't move," he commanded, the authority in his voice making the puppy sit up straight. He reached the bedside and awkwardly adjusted the pillow behind her, his large, scarred hands looking ridiculous against the delicate floral pillowcase she must have brought from home. "His name is Sunny," she said, watching him with a curiosity that overrode her fear. She didn't seem to realize who he was, or perhaps in this room, on the edge of existence, social hierarchies didn't matter.
I'm Simon.
And you're not a doctor. You're wearing a $3,000 suit, Taesung stiffened. He looked down at the puppy, Sunny, who was now chewing on his shoelace.
I'm
Looking for someone. He lied, though the lie felt heavy on his tongue. Wrong room, he should leave. His lieutenant was in recovery. His phone was likely buzzing with messages about shipments and territory lines. But he didn't move. He looked at the bedside table. There were no flowers from family. No get-well-soon balloons. Just a stack of books, a cup of water with a bendy straw, and a leash. You're alone, he stated. It wasn't a question. It was an observation of the tactical situation. Simone looked away, her gaze drifting to the window where the city skyline was just a gray blur. Sunny is here, she said, a deflection that was also a heartbreaking truth. The nurses looked the other way because there's not much time left to follow rules. The admission hung in the air. Taesung felt a pang in his chest, a sensation he usually suppressed with whiskey. He looked at this woman, Simone, who was facing the end of her life with a dog she couldn't walk and a room empty of people. He thought of his own apartment, a penthouse of glass and steel that was equally empty, cold and devoid of anything living. He needs water, Taesung said abruptly, pointing at the panting dog. He walked to the sink in the corner, found a plastic bowl, and filled it. He set it down, and Sunny lapped at it greedily. When he stood up, Simone was watching him, a small, tired smile ghosting her lips. Thank you, she said. You don't have to stay, I know, Taesung replied. He turned to the door. He opened it. But before he stepped out into the hallway, into the world of blood and money, he looked back. I'll come back, he said. He didn't know why he said it, but he knew, with terrifying certainty, that he meant it. The next day, the nurses at the station whispered as Taesung walked by. He had traded the charcoal suit for a midnight blue one, but the aura of danger remained. He carried a paper bag that smelled of rich, savory broth, not the cafeteria sludge they served on trays. He found the room 402 and knocked. It was a soft knock, uncharacteristic of a man who usually kicked doors down. Come in, Simone's voice called, stronger than yesterday but still threadbare. When he entered, Sunny was asleep on the foot of the bed, curled into a croissant shape of golden fur. Simone looked surprised, her eyes widening as she saw him. She had tried to fix her hair, he noticed. The braids were tied back neatly, and she was sitting up. You actually came back, she said, sounding as if she had lost a bet with herself. I said I would, Taesung replied simply. He set the bag on the rolling table. Hospital food is garbage. I brought silongtang, oxbone soup. It is good for strength. He pulled up the plastic chair, the vinyl creaking under his weight. For a long time, the only sound was the rustle of containers. He opened the soup, the steam rising in white ribbons, and handed her a spoon. He didn't offer to feed her. That would be an insult to her dignity, but he watched her hands closely, ready to catch the bowl if her grip failed. She took a sip, and a hum of appreciation escaped her throat. This is amazing, she whispered. Real food, Taesung nodded, leaning back, crossing his arms. He felt exposed here, without his soldiers, without his weapon. Why? She asked suddenly, pausing with a spoon halfway to her mouth. Why are you doing this? You look like a man who has very important places to be. You look like you own half the city. Taesung looked at Sunny, who was twitching in a dream. I own nothing that matters, he said, a sentence that surprised him with its honesty. And I like dogs. It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. But Simone didn't push. Instead, she told him about Sunny, how she got him as a rescue, how he destroyed 3 pairs of shoes in a week, how he was the only thing that kept her getting out of bed in the mornings before the sickness got too heavy. He didn't check his phone. He didn't think about the turf war. He listened to the cadence of her voice, the way she laughed even when it turned into a cough. He learned that she was a graphic designer, that she loved jazz but hated the rain, that she had no parents left, no siblings. She was an island, just like him, but her isolation was forced by biology, while his was built by choices. The doctors say the treatment isn't working, she said, dropping the bomb casually between a story about a park visit. So now we're just waiting. Taesung clenched his jaw so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked at this woman who had been a stranger 24 hours ago and felt a fierce, irrational desire to fight something for her. But death was the one enemy he couldn't intimidate. Over the next week, the routine solidified. Taesung would arrive at 7 p.m. after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the hospital settled into its night rhythm. He brought things. Not expensive jewelry or grand gestures, but practical things. A softer blanket made of cashmere that he claimed he just had lying around, a portable humidifier because the air was too dry. High-quality treats for Sunny. The nurses stopped whispering and started nodding at him. He was no longer the scary Mafia Don. He was the visitor in 402. One evening, the atmosphere in the room was heavier than usual. Simone was lying flat, her breathing shallow, her skin ashen. Sunny was whining, pacing the small floor space, sensing the shift in the atmospheric pressure of her pain. Taesung sat closer than usual, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tight. "It hurts today," Simone murmured, her eyes closed. She didn't try to hide it anymore. The polite veneer of the first meetings had worn away, leaving a raw, intimate honesty. Taesung reached out. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, terrified of breaking her, then covered her cold hand with his. Her fingers were skeletal, but they gripped his with shocking strength. "Tell me something real, Taesung," she whispered. "Not the soup, not the weather. Tell me who you are." He looked at their joined hands, hers dark and frail, his scarred and strong. He could tell her he was a monster. He could tell her about the blood on his ledger. Instead, he chose a different truth. "I grew up in an orphanage in Busan," he said, his voice low, a rumble in the quiet room. "I was always hungry. I fought because if I didn't fight, I disappeared. I built a kingdom, so I would never be hungry again. But now, I sit in a room full of people who work for me, and I am the loneliest man on earth." Simone turned her head, her eyes opening to search his face. "You're not alone now," she said. It was a simple statement, but it hit him with the force of a physical blow. She squeezed his hand. "And neither am I. I was so scared," Taesung. "Not of dying, but of dying in a room where the only sound was the machine beeping. I didn't want to be a statistic." Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes, tracking into the pillow. Taesung felt a burning behind his own eyes, a sensation he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He leaned in, his forehead almost touching her shoulder. "You won't be," he swore, and it sounded like a vow. "I am here. Sunny is here. We aren't going anywhere." For the first time, he wasn't the boss protecting his territory. He was a guardian protecting a soul. He poured water for her, lifted her head gently to help her drink, and wiped her face with a cool cloth. The domesticity of the actions, the simple service of it, felt more significant than any deal he had ever closed. The bubble of their sanctuary was punctured the following Tuesday. Taesung was reading aloud to her, a poetry book she had requested, when the door opened briskly. It wasn't a nurse. It was the head physician, Dr. Eris, a stern woman with a clipboard and tired eyes. She stopped short when she saw Taesung. He was in his shirt sleeves, his jacket draped over the chair, feeding Sunny a piece of jerky. The scene was domestic, almost normal, which made it entirely out of place for the oncology ward's terminal cases. "Sir," Dr. Eris said, her tone professional but guarded. "We need to discuss the patient's care plan. And hospital policy is strict regarding non-family members after visiting hours. Especially," she glanced at Sunny, "regarding animals." Taesung stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He unfolded his height until he towered over the doctor. He didn't glare, but he put on the face, the mask of the Gwangja boss. The air in the room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The dog stays," he said calmly. "He is part of the treatment," Dr. Eris bristled. "That is not for you to decide. And frankly, who are you?" "Ms. Williams is listed as having no next of kin. Unless you are a relative, I have to ask you to leave so we can administer her evening protocol." Simone stirred in the bed, looking panicked. He's my," she faltered, not knowing what to call him. "Friend? Stranger? Savior." Taesung stepped between the doctor and the bed, shielding Simone from the clinical harshness. "I am her fiancé," he lied, the words coming out smooth and cold like polished steel. He didn't look back at Simone, but He could feel her shock radiating behind him. And I am taking responsibility for her comfort. If you need me to sign papers, bring them. If you need money to overlook the dog, name the figure. But do not tell me to leave. The doctor stared at him, assessing the cut of his clothes, the dangerous stillness of his posture, and the sheer force of his will. She blinked first. I will need to verify this with the patient, she said, her voice wavering slightly. She looked past him. Ms. Williams. Taesung turned, his heart hammering against his ribs, a rare feeling of fear. If she denied it, he was out. He looked at her, pleading silently with eyes that usually only commanded. Simone looked at the doctor, then at Taesung, and finally at Sunny, who was resting his chin on Taesung's shoe. She took a breath. Yes, she said, her voice clear. He is my fiancé. Please, doctor. Let him stay, the doctor sighed, a sound of resignation.
Fine.
But keep the dog quiet. And come to the station to update the records. As the door clicked shut, the tension snapped. Taesung turned to Simone, his expression apologetic. I had to, he said. I didn't want to leave you. Simone looked at him, and a weak, genuine laugh bubbled up. Fiancé, she teased, though her eyes were wet. You move fast, Mr. Bossman. Taesung sat down heavily, exhaling a breath he felt he'd been holding for years. I had to make it believable, he murmured. But as he looked at her, he realized the terrifying truth. He wished it wasn't a lie. He had claimed her to save her from the rules, but in doing so, he had bound himself to her fate. He was no longer just a visitor. He was her person. And she was dying. The paperwork for the discharge was a flurry of signatures that Taesung executed with the same aggressive efficiency he used to sign territory treaties. Dr. Eris had been blunt. There was nothing left that the hospital could do but manage the pain. Hospice, she had said, the word hanging heavy and gray in the fluorescent hallway. Taesung had rejected the idea of a facility immediately. He wasn't going to let Simone spend her final weeks in a place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. He returned to room 402, where Simone was sitting on the edge of the bed, her small bag packed, looking terrified. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice trembling as he picked up her bag. The lie. It worked. You can go now. You don't have to take a dying stranger into your home. Taesung stopped, the bag in his hand. He looked at the peeling paint on the wall, the flickering light, the sheer loneliness of the space. Then he looked at her. You are not a stranger, he said, his voice dropping to that rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. And I am not doing this for you. I am doing it because I cannot sleep thinking of you here alone, he signaled to the hallway, and two large men in dark suits, his personal security, stepped in. Simone shrank back, clutching Sunny's leash. They will carry your things, Taesung explained gently. And they will carry you, if you are too tired to walk. One of the guards, a man named Minho who had a scar running down his neck, looked at the puppy and then at the boss. His stoic expression cracked for a millisecond of confusion before he nodded respectfully. Let's go home, Taesung said. The word home sounded foreign in his mouth, a concept he had abandoned years ago. But as he guided Simone toward the elevator, shielding her from the curious stares of the hospital staff, he felt a strange sense of alignment. The elevator doors closed, sealing them in a steel box, and for the first time in his life, Taesung didn't check the exits. He just watched the numbers count down, standing shoulder to shoulder with a woman who had nothing left to lose, and realized he was terrified of losing her. Taesung's penthouse was a fortress of glass and black marble, suspended 50 floors above the city. It was designed to intimidate, to showcase power and detachment. But within 24 hours, the ecosystem had been completely disrupted. Sunny treated the Italian leather sofas like a jungle gem and slid across the polished marble floors as if they were his personal ice rink. The silence, usually absolute, was now punctured by the click-clack of claws and the soft hum of the oxygen concentrator Taesung had installed in the guest suite, which he had immediately insisted be the master suite because the view was better. Simone was overwhelmed, sitting in the center of a living room that cost more than her entire lifetime's earnings, wrapped in the cashmere blanket he had brought her at the hospital. It's too much, she whispered one evening as he set a tray of herbal tea and cut fruit on the low table. Taesung, I can't pay you back for this. I don't have. Time to pay you back. He paused, looking out at the city lights that glittered like scattered diamonds below them. He sat on the floor near her feet, abandoning the armchair. You are paying me, he said quietly. He pointed to the corner where Minho, the terrifying bodyguard, was currently on his knees letting Sunny chew on his knuckles while trying to suppress a grin. You brought life into a mausoleum. Before you, this place was just a storage unit for a rich man.
Now,
It is a house. The adjustment wasn't easy. There were bad nights. Nights where the pain spiked so high that Simone couldn't speak, only gasp, her body curling in on itself. On those nights, the Mafia boss vanished. Taesung became a nurse, a pillar of calm. He learned to administer her morphine drips with the precision of a surgeon. He learned to read the minute changes in her breathing. He sat by her bedside for hours, reading aloud or simply holding her hand, anchoring her to the world when she felt like drifting away. One rainy Tuesday, Sunny knocked over a Ming vase, sending shards of ancient blue and white porcelain scattering across the room. The guards froze, terrified of Taesung's wrath. Taesung walked in, saw the destruction, saw Simone's horrified face, and saw the puppy cowering. He started to laugh. It was a rusty, unused sound, but it was genuine. I never liked that vase anyway, he said, sweeping the $1,000,000 shards into a pile. It was too pretentious. Sunny is better taste, Simone looked at him, her eyes wide, and in that moment, the transactional nature of their arrangement dissolved completely. This wasn't charity. This was a family being forged in the fire of urgency. A month in, the trajectory changed. It started with a phone call Taesung made at 3 a.m., pacing the terrace while smoking a cigarette he hadn't touched in years. He had called in every favor, threatened every administrator, and bribed every board member of a specialized research institute in Zurich. He wasn't a man who accepted impossible as an answer. The next morning, a new team of doctors arrived at the penthouse, specialists who didn't look at Simone as a terminal case, but as a challenge. They proposed a new immunotherapy protocol, experimental and aggressive. It will be hard, the lead specialist warned, looking at Simone's frail frame. It might kill her faster. That night, Taesung sat on the edge of her bed. The room was dim, lit only by the city glow. You have to choose, he told her, his voice tight. I can buy the medicine. I can pay the doctors. But I cannot buy your will. You have to want to stay. Simone looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in the dark circles under his eyes, the desperation he tried to hide behind his stoic mask. She reached out and touched his face, her thumb tracing the sharp line of his jaw. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why are you fighting so hard for someone you met by accident? Taesung turned his face into her palm, closing his eyes. The walls he had built over decades of violence and betrayal crumbled into dust. Because, he choked out, I've spent my whole life walking into the wrong rooms. Violence, greed, power. They were all wrong rooms. Room 402. That was the first right room I ever entered. I love you, Simone. I don't care if it's crazy. I don't care if we don't have time. I love you. The confession hung in the air, raw and terrified. Simone cried, silent tears that ran hot over her cheeks. I want to stay, she sobbed. Taesung, I want to stay. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck, holding her as if his strength alone could keep her tethered to the earth. Then we fight, he whispered into her hair. We fight everything. 3 seasons passed. The seasons were marked not by the weather outside, but by the battles fought inside the penthouse. There were months of nausea, of hair loss, of weakness, so profound Simone couldn't lift her head. But there were also victories. The tumor markers dropped. The color returned to her cheeks. Her hair began to grow back in soft, dark curls. Sunny grew from a clumsy puppy into a sleek, loyal dog who never left her side, acting as a furry barometer for her health. And then, a year and 2 months after the day the puppy ran into the wrong room, the penthouse was filled not with the silence of sickbeds, but with the chaotic noise of a celebration. They didn't return to the hospital. They went to a small chapel on the outskirts of the city, a place with stained glass windows that threw pools of red and blue light onto the floor. It was a small wedding, Just the guards, who were now weeping openly, the medical team who had become friends, and a few of Taesung's oldest associates who looked bewildered to be at a wedding that wasn't a strategic alliance. Simone stood at the altar, not in a hospital gown, but in a dress of ivory silk that flowed around her like water. She was thin, yes, and she leaned slightly on a cane, but she was alive. Vibrant, impossible, miraculous life radiated from her. Taesung stood waiting for her, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't wearing the armor of his charcoal suits. He wore a lighter gray, softer, more open. When she reached him, Sunny trotted up the aisle with the rings tied to his collar, barking once for effect. The officiant began the ceremony, but Taesung interrupted gently. He took Simone's hands. "I used to believe in fate only as a thing that punished us," he said, his voice carrying to the back of the chapel. "I thought my path was set in stone and blood. But then a dog ran through a door, and I followed him. You are my redemption, Simone. You are the only territory I ever want to claim." Simone laughed through her tears, squeezing his hands. "And you, Mr. Boss Man," she replied, "are the biggest soft in the world. You saved my life, but you also gave me a life worth saving." When they kissed, the applause from the pews was deafening, a sound of pure, unadulterated victory against the odds. The evening sun was setting over the city, casting the penthouse terrace in a warm, amber glow. The party was over. The guests had gone. It was just the three of them again. Taesung loosened his tie and leaned against the railing, watching Simone throw a ball for Sunny on the artificial grass patch they had installed. She moved with ease now, the cane forgotten on a chair. She was laughing, the sound ringing clear and bright in the evening air. It was a sound that Taesung greedily stored in his memory, hoarding it against all the dark days of his past. He looked down at his hand, at the simple gold band on his finger. It felt heavy, grounding. He thought about the man he had been a year ago, cold, efficient, waiting for a bullet. That man felt like a stranger now. He felt a wet nose nudge his hand. Sunny was there, dropping the slobbery ball at his feet, tail wagging with expectant joy. Taesung crouched down and ruffled the dog's ears. "Good boy," he whispered. "Best mistake I ever made." Simone walked over, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. They stood there in silence, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. They knew the future wasn't guaranteed. His world was still dangerous. Her health was a precious, fragile thing. But the fear that used to rule them had been replaced by something stronger. Gratitude. They were here. They were together. And they were home. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Taesung turned to her arms, kissing her forehead. "I was thinking," he said, smiling, "that we should get Sunny a brother." Simone laughed, the sound floating up toward the stars, and for a moment, everything in the world was exactly, perfectly right.